Irish breakfast is so good. It's probably one of my favorite teas. Welcome to Cafe Libellus, where I, Kristen, review books in the most comfortable way I know possible. Today, we'll be talking about The Furies of Calderon by Jim Butcher. It's the first book in the Codex Alera series, published in 2004 by Ace Books. In the Rome-esque nation of Alera, everybody can control some sort of sprite or spirit that's connected to the elements of fire, water, earth, air, metal, and wood. But our main protagonist, Tavi, cannot. He's 15 years old, but still has not been able to find his sprite that allows him to do fury crafting. One day, he and his uncle come across invaders in their land. After this, Tavi gets involved in, honestly, events that he could never have predicted, and he has to survive on his wits and skills alone. I have heard quite a lot about this book in past years. My initial interest was piqued when I heard that Butcher actually wrote this series based on something of a dare, where at a workshop, he had said that any good writer with good execution can make a good book out of a bad idea. One of the people at the workshop asked if he could make a good book out of two bad ideas, and those two bad ideas were Pokemon and the fate of an ancient Roman legion. I was pretty excited to see what he did with that. I'm a huge fan of Pokemon. I grew up on it. I was curious to see how he handled that. Rome, I've never been as interested in, but it's still one of those really cool ancient civilizations that impacted a lot of the Western world, and so I was curious to see how he would combine the two. I actually tried to read this a few years ago, but couldn't get past the first chapter. The writing style just really wasn't for me at the time, and I had a lot of other books that I would have wanted to read, and so I just ended up putting it away and reading something else. But a friend has lent me the book, and so I finally have the chance to read it. And I gotta say, not what I expected. When I first picked up the book a few years ago, there was something about the writing style that seemed kind of off. Not in a bad way, but just in a way that seemed simple, I guess. Even that's not really a good word for it. The writing is much more character and plot dependent than it is descriptive. The language pretty much cuts straight to the point. There's not a whole lot of dilly-dallying on descriptions, and it focuses a lot more on what characters do and say rather than on descriptions of the world around them. The writing does do its job well. You get very quickly acquainted with characters, and you come to care about them pretty quickly as well. Most, if not all, of the characters are plays on classic fantasy and anime tropes, but they're done a little differently to where they seem more realistic and less tropey. Tavi is the main character. Instead of being someone special with lots of different powers, he actually has no powers, and that is crippling in a way in his world, but it also marks him out as special in his world. So we know that that's a play on the chosen one trope. He's pretty cool, always acting very selfless and clever and intelligent. And the way Butcher writes him, that doesn't come across as cheesy or unearned or unrealistic. He very much comes across as this kid who grew up being selfless and learning to help others before himself. And that's a core part of his personality, and I really liked Tavi for that. Other characters include Amara, Bernard, and Isana. All three of them are very interesting characters as well, and also plays on general tropes. Amara is the strong female character who kicks butt and is really good at her job, and is super loyal to the Emperor. Is he an Emperor? But that doesn't come across as cheesy or unrealistic. Bernard and Isana are both really, really good fury crafters, and they're also very kind and selfless. And none of it comes across as unrealistic. They all grow into the kind of characters that you come to care for at the end. I did have a little bit of an issue with how Isana was characterized in the beginning, Isana is the first major female character that gets a bit more direct characterization in the beginning. And the way Butcher does that is by introducing a flaw, but the flaw is based on her physical appearance. And so that made me think in the beginning that even though she was a very talented and strong Fury crafter, that she was going to be relegated to, she's going to grow and become someone because she finds value in someone who actually loves her for herself. And while that's not a bad thing necessarily, it is an overdone trope and devalues Isana as a Fury crafter. But that didn't happen. I'm really glad that didn't happen. That could have been another one of Butcher's setting up a trope and then defying it. So I was very happy that that was not a focus of her character development in this book. She's great. I like her a lot. These characters and others are set up more in the beginning and middle of the book. Some people might think this is slow-paced because a lot of the beginning and middle is spent setting up these characters, getting us to know more about them, to accept them as characters and not as caricatures. And so the plot kind of goes slowly in that respect. I personally didn't mind that at all. I love it when authors take the time to set up characters, set up scenarios, so that things in the future make sense, so that readers can accept them and feel the impact of them more deeply and understand what that means for the characters and the world that they're in. By the end of the book, you see that Butcher's slower pace and setup pays off. The climax is crazy, and I was most invested during that time. All of that said, I did still find it a little hard to read. It does get a little repetitive. It's kind of boring. You know, as much as I can appreciate taking the time to develop characters and set up plot points and scenarios, I mean, it can still get kind of boring. Not only that, but even though he goes to defy some tropes, he also falls into a lot of them. Maybe not into Western fantasy tropes, but definitely into anime tropes. I kid you not. I had to put down the book so many times because I was laughing so hard. This book is literally a shonen fantasy anime. There are so many similarities just in characters alone. I won't spoil any of the plot points. There are a lot of tropey plot points to the point where, you know, part of the reason I couldn't get invested in the book was because I was nailing down every single event and what would happen, even things that wouldn't be revealed for further books into the future. And I admit I probably only got those because I read a lot of fantasy, and some of these are changes on tropes of the fantasy genre. And because I watch a lot of anime, because I'm a filthy weeb. And so I was able to guess them pretty easily. I don't know if Butcher intended to put these tropes in here, but they're there. So again, none of the plot tropes, but here are some of the character tropes. An old fool who is not as he seems, a hot-headed, blunt, and compassionate male leader of some sort, a yandere, women who are skinny and look boyish, women who don't think they're attractive because they're skinny and look boyish, fights that are too fast for everyone else to see, and a duel of legends that occurs during the middle of a heavy military battle that everyone makes space for to watch. Again, those are just a couple of the tropes that pop up. Now that I think about it, those aren't all character tropes, but you get what I mean. There's a lot of anime tropes in there. So, given all of that, my overall recommendation of the book is probably a 6 out of 10. The writing was fine. I think the characters were set up well, but it wasn't anything particularly special either. Butcher goes to change tropes and experiments and tweaks them slightly, but nothing too different from the typical tropes we find in fantasy. And he also includes quite a lot of anime tropes, which again, I'm not sure he meant to do or not. I am not fully invested in this series, so I will not be reading the rest of Codex Alera. I'm sorry. There are just too many other books I want to read, and it honestly sounds like I'm going to be getting into the Malazan Book of the Fallen series and the Dark Tower series, which are both extremely long. And they capture my interest more than the Codex Alera series does. But I can definitely recommend this book to people who want a lighter fantasy read and who wants to see some tropes upended. I think this is actually a great first read for people who are getting into the fantasy genre. Butcher doesn't stray too far from the mainstays of the genre. So you'll be able to get a good sense of what you can find in fantasy, but also have something that differentiates it from other fantasy. If you are a reader who wants something deep or dark, this is not going to fulfill that craving for you. This is very much a fun, easygoing novel where you are along for the ride. So I really hope that if you go and pick this up, that you do enjoy it. Thanks for eavesdropping. I'll see you next time.